Hello. Hello, 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 hello. Hôm nay là ngày 22 tháng 5 2024. Thì đúng như buổi trước của mình live là vào thứ tư và đúng lịch là thứ sáu nhà mình, nhưng mà như mình đã nói thì là thứ sáu thì mình có một chút gọi là đi chơi với bạn bè, cho nên là mình không live được. Và đúng như theo lịch ấy, là thứ hai, tức là ngày 20 mình sẽ live lại. Nhưng mà đến khoảng 8 giờ ấy, thì mình có bạn gọi điện, bạn bị ốm, cho nên là mình phải chạy sang bên đấy và đưa đi viện, nên buổi hôm đó không live được. Tính đến hôm nay là nghỉ 2 buổi rồi. Đầu tiên ấy thì là cái góc cam nó hơi khác, và chất lượng cam nó hơi khác một chút nữa. Lý do là đúng như cái tiêu đề mình có ghi ấy, ở đâu đó đây thế này, là mình quên cái gọi là gì, cái adapter để chuyển đổi cắm USB, cho nên là thứ nhất là mình không có internet bằng đường dây được, và thứ hai là mình không dùng cái cam USB được, đang dùng tạm cái cam của laptop. Mình định là hôm nay mình sẽ không live rồi đấy, nhưng mà nghĩ như nào thì mình nghỉ 2 buổi rồi, mình bỏ 2 buổi rồi, không có lý do gì mà hôm nay mình không có đủ đồ chất lượng như bình thường mà mình không live cả. Nên là đấy rồi. Rồi thì mình đi Đà Lạt chơi 4 ngày 3 đêm. Ban đầu nghĩ là sẽ kiểu rất là chán ấy, kiểu là muốn về ấy. Vì là 4 ngày 3 đêm mà không đi đâu, không làm gì cả thì kiểu rất là nhanh chán ấy, nhưng mà nó vèo cái nó hết. Thứ nữa là đấy, mình đã bị thói quen là mình nhìn thấy cam trên, nhưng mà đáng lẽ cái cam của mình ở đây. Thì 4 ngày 3 đêm, nhưng mà đi thì hôm đầu tiên đến thì chưa được check in, cho nên là đi một quán cà phê này một chút, rồi buổi chiều hôm đó không đi đâu cả, ở nhà nghỉ ngơi, vì mọi người lái xe cũng mệt. Rồi đến tối hôm đấy thì đi ăn rồi uống nhẹ một chút, đến khoảng tầm 11 rưỡi 12 giờ đi ngủ rồi. Hôm sau thì dậy rồi đi cà phê rồi lại buổi chiều đi về, đi cà phê này, xong rồi đi ăn này, xong rồi đi về, mình nghĩ như vậy. Rồi buổi chiều bắt đầu đi mua đồ để buổi tối nhậu. Buổi tối hôm đấy thì là tối hôm thứ hai đúng không, mà nhậu đến 4 giờ sáng, cho nên là hôm sau nữa là hôm thứ ba là 19 giờ mới dậy, 9 giờ mới dậy, và 11 giờ bắt đầu ra khỏi nhà đi ăn sáng xong rồi định đi ra suối để ngồi chơi ở suối một chút, thì lại bị mưa, thế là thôi lại ngồi ngay trên một cái quán vệ đường ấy, bên đường có cái mái che, thì ngồi đến tầm 1 rưỡi 2 giờ thì về nhà. Ăn cũng lửng, cho nên là với cả thêm nữa là ăn sáng rồi cộng thêm cả ăn một đĩa một hộp kem xôi, cái gì, một hộp kem bơ, cho nên là cũng hơi lửng. Nên về nhà úp một gói mì, mỗi người một gói mì ăn. Rồi đấy là tối hôm thứ ba, tất nhiên là không uống rồi, nhưng mà tối hôm thứ ba mình đi ăn gì ta, đêm thứ ba mình đi ăn gì nhỉ, ăn mì này, đúng rồi, đi uống sữa đậu các thứ. Đúng rồi, đi ăn ăn gì nhỉ, ăn gì xong đi uống sữa đậu nhỉ, đúng rồi, nhớ rồi, đi ăn lẩu xong rồi đi ăn uống sữa đậu và đi ăn bánh về. Rồi đến hôm thứ tư thì cũng dậy muộn thôi, để tầm bắt đầu 9 giờ là bắt đầu lên xe chuẩn bị về Sài Gòn, kết thúc 4 ngày 3 đêm. Rồi thì có rất là nhiều clip mà mình đã cho vào list, và mình cố gắng nhịn là không xem. Thì bắt đầu tiên một clip rất là nhẹ nhàng thôi, để mình truyền màn này, tắt tiếng ra đi nha. Clip này là của Vox thì mình cũng xem ít thôi, không xem nhiều lắm, bởi vì thực ra thì bây giờ chất lượng của Vox nó không như hồi xưa nữa rồi. Sao lại màn này, sao lại bị đơ rồi, trời sút. screen capture, Microsoft Edge. Hả? Bị sao nhỉ? Display là screen capture này, Edge này. Chứ rồi sao nó không... Nó bị sao nhỉ? Bị sao các? Nếu mình mở thêm một tab mới thì nó có đổi không? Nó không đổi. Để mình thử nha. Bạn này nhạy cảm nha. Đấy, như này này. Quay lại đây này. Built-in này. Đeo này. Rồi, ok. Thì đây là một clip của Vox nói về việc là cái screen ấy, có nghĩa là trước khi đi ngủ mà mình xem một cái gì đó ấy, nó có thực sự còn trước khi đi ngủ mà mình xem điện thoại ấy, thì có bị ảnh hưởng đến giấc ngủ không? 30 giây nhưng mà bây giờ mình sẽ tua lại từ đầu này.
If you've heard anything about sleep science, it's probably that you're not supposed to use any screens before bed. And if you're anything like me, you've probably ignored that advice.
Because, come on, even sleep experts can't resist.
Do you use your phone before bed?
Yes, just to catch up on my calendar and email. It's always less than 30 minutes for me.
That's Rohan Nagare, a sleep researcher who's co-authored several papers on the topic. As a chronic screens before bed guy myself, I went into our conversation wanting to know if there was any way that we could keep using our phones at night without completely wrecking our sleep schedules.
Turns out, science suggests our sleep schedule is way more malleable than we might think.
Đấy, vấn đề rồi, bắt đầu có vấn đề này. Mình like được 10 phút, bắt đầu có vấn đề là cái mạng nó bị không ổn định do là đang live bằng wifi ạ. Tiếp tục.
Before we dive into the science, let's first get a quick review on how our body responds to natural light, like the sun.
And the lack thereof. You've probably noticed that at night you naturally start feeling sleepy. This is because your body produces melatonin, a hormone that plays a huge role in sleep.
Melatonin is not just any other hormone, so it's kind of an internal timekeeper.
As the sun rises and you get exposed to its bright light, your body suppresses the production of melatonin, helping you feel awake and alert. But sunlight, your body suppresses the production of melatonin, helping the sun rises and you get exposed to its bright light, your body suppresses the production of melatonin, helping you feel awake and alert. But sun exposure isn't the only factor here. The color temperature of light also changes throughout the day. Daylight exists at roughly 5600 Kelvin, which leans quite blue.
Ok, cái này thì biết bởi vì trong setup đèn máy ảnh này thì cũng có cái 5600 độ Kelvin này.
The sunset leans much warmer, in the 3000 Kelvin range. This natural color shift, combined with the decreasing brightness, tells our body to kickstart the production of melatonin, which makes us feel sleepy. Natural light makes things simple on our bodies.
But once you start adding artificial light into the mix, things get a little more complicated, especially when we're staring at these all night.
Phone screens at their baseline have a color temperature of 5600 Kelvin, or daylight.
So when you hear that using your phone before bed is bad for you, this is the commonly cited reason as to why.
The phone's artificial daylight, aka blue light, suppresses the production of melatonin, disrupting our feelings of sleepiness.
Now, you might be wondering, don't phones have a built-in feature that's intended to counteract this blue light? They do. It's called night mode or night shift. But does it actually work?
Well, in 2019, Rohan co-authored a study that tried to answer that question.
It's a very smart feature. The idea is right. They're trying to manipulate a lighting characteristic, which is the spectrum, to reduce the circadian effectiveness.
The study looked at two modes of warm shift. High CCT, which meant that the screen colors were intensely shifted to the warm end of the spectrum, and low CCT, which meant that there was only a slight warm shift. Both modes suppressed melatonin, the sleepy hormone, and the results showed that there wasn't a meaningful difference between the two. And while that makes it sound like night shift doesn't work, it's actually a lot more complicated than that.
Spectrum is just one aspect. Distribution, duration, timing, and amount needs to be considered. So if you're using phone in the night, I wouldn't be too concerned if it's 20 minutes, 30 minutes. But if it's beyond that, if you're gonna watch a movie every night or like 3 episodes of a Netflix show, then it accumulates a pretty good circadian dose, which can keep delaying you every day.
What Rohan is saying here is that limiting the time you spend on your phone can also make a difference, and warm shift is just part of the solution.
When we use our phones, we're staring directly into a light source, and how much light falls onto a certain area, like our eyes, usually measured in lux, is dramatically impacted by our closeness to the device. In fact, you experience a closer light source as 4 times more powerful than that same light source twice the distance away from you.
If you're going to get 1000 lux at your eye, it honestly doesn't matter if it's a warm source or a cool source. That's too high and you're already saturating your circadian system.
So we know that limiting screen duration, shifting the colors warmer, and lowering the brightness all helps.
But Rohan also let me in on an interesting biological hack that can make a huge difference in how impactful your late night screen time is.
What you really want is the contrast between how much light you get immediately after you wake up for an hour or two and immediately before you sleep 1 or 2 hours. It's possible to trick your circadian system and say, okay, if I'm gonna blast my screen brightness and bump up my 50 lux to 200 lux in the evening, I can just counter that by getting 800 lux in the morning. So that's the beauty of your circadian system. You can use its own mechanisms against it.
So basically, if you go for a sunny walk in the morning, you could potentially offset the amount of circadian disruption you're experiencing from your phone at the end of the day.
Body hacks aside, the thing that I realized as I was researching the story is that there are so many more factors that impact our sleep besides just the blue light that comes out of our phones. And we haven't even touched on them all yet. Like what you do on your phone, whether it be doom scrolling or watching a scary movie, all that can be just as stimulating and disruptive to your sleep as the amount of light that you're taking in.
At the end of the day, figuring out how to have a healthy relationship with our devices is a big step in figuring out how to have a healthy relationship with our sleep.
Thank you so much for watching this episode for this video. Brilliant.
Nói chung là không có gì nhiều, đúng như những gì mình kỳ vọng. Bởi vì là bây giờ họ chuyên nghiệp rồi, Vox họ làm chuyên nghiệp rồi, nó công nghiệp không phải chuyên nghiệp. Nên là không có đủ thời gian để sản xuất một cái video có chiều sâu như hồi trước nữa. Clip thứ hai tất nhiên rồi là của Johnny Harris. Không, mình xem cái này trước đi. Cái Search Party này là một cái channel mà bạn của Johnny Harris. Anh này thì rất là chuyên về thể thao hơn, nhưng mà cái clip này thì liên quan cũng hơi kiểu Johnny, đó là thiên về địa lý và chính trị cũng như lịch sử. New steel plan keep the US ahead of China.
In November 2023, this mysterious airplane took flight for the first time. And it didn't look like a normal plane because, well, it isn't. Its distinctive wing shape, sleek profile, and almost everything else is designed for one purpose: to fly silently into any country on Earth, remain undetectable by any radar or sensors, and drop a bomb.
Yeah.
It's called the B-21 Raider, and the United States government is willing to pay around $700 million for one of them. Same price as building a skyscraper.
$700
One of the
triệu một
most
cái.
expensive planes the US has ever made, So it's no surprise that its expectations are high.
This isn't just another airplane. It's the embodiment of America's determination, and it's a testament to our strategy of deterrence with the capability.
Cái này thấy hồi trước rồi mà, nhưng chắc có thể đây là bản nâng cấp. Từ xưa đã có thấy cái bản này rồi mà.
To back it up every time and everywhere. That's what America does.
So what is it about this plane that makes it so expensive? And does the US really need it?
The B-21 Raider is the first strategic bomber in more than 3 decades.
The most capable stealth bomber ever built.
Stealth là tàng hình à?
As long as we fight on the surface of the earth, Hitler has all the advantage. But with a strategy of air power, the advantage is ours.
For almost a century, one of the US military strengths has been its air power. It's built some excellent fighter jets, sure, but it's always had some of the best bombers in the world. The US used thousands of bombers to pummel Nazi Germany before invading, then used them again against communist forces in Korea and Vietnam.
Since the end of World War II, this has been an incredibly important strategic capability.
Todd Harrison is an expert in defense strategy.
A single aircraft could hit 50 or 80 targets. That is an incredible firepower advantage.
During the Cold War, the US and the Soviet Union both kept large bomber fleets ready in case war broke out between them. But the US kept improving its bombers because the Soviet Union kept building better air defenses. Air defenses are radars and sensors that detect and track planes, and guided missiles and fast fighter jets that can shoot them down. This cat and mouse game is how the US ended up with the 3 types of bombers that it uses today. B-52H Stratofortress, which the US has been using since the 1950s, the B-1 Lancer from the 1980s, and the B-2 Spirit from the 1990s. Each can travel very long distances to bomb a target, but are limited by what kind of air defenses they encounter. If there aren't any, then the US can use the Stratofortresses, which are huge but easily detectable. If there are older or not very sophisticated air defenses, the US can use the B-1 Lancers, which can evade some radars by flying at low altitudes and up to 900 miles per hour. But if there are modern, advanced air defenses, the US uses the B-2 Spirit, the world's only stealth bomber. Stealth basically means radars have a very hard time detecting it. The Spirit's shape and code stealth basically
shapely of aircraft design accordance with technology that
means
make
radars have a very hard
detective by radar or sonar difficult.
time detecting it. The Spirit's shape and coding absorbs and deflects radar waves, so it appears smaller on radar than it actually is. It has a 172-foot long wingspan.
172 feet là cỡ 50 mét à? 53 cỡ
But
đây.
on most radars, appears to be the size of a tennis ball. Spirits also have electronics that jam and obscure sensors, and even technology that hides the heat its engine emits from infrared sensors. So if sensors can't really detect the Spirit, then enemies can't really shoot it down. So it can theoretically get into any country and drop a bomb on anything. Just having that ability is a major way in which the US protects itself.
Well, ultimately, it's about deterrence. When we get into a crisis situation with another country, we want them to be able to look at our fleet of aircraft and say, there's nothing we could do to stop those aircraft from hitting targets in our country, so we better back down.
This thinking also applies to the US's deadliest weapon.
All right, so the point here is that the US believes that in order to defend itself, it needs the ability to drop a bomb on anywhere on Earth. And so what I did here was design an animation that's going to visualize this cat and mouse game. Countries are going to build better and better defenses, and the US is going to have to build better and better, and I mean stealthier planes, in order to penetrate those defenses. If a country ever builds defenses that the US can't penetrate, the US considers that a national security threat. And so before moving on any further, I figured this might be a good chance to talk about another kind of security. That's your personal security. As you know, there are bad people out there on the internet trying to luckily our data and they can have your request first at a search Cog video. And so I've been using line. Thanks again, Incogni, for your support. Now we'll get you back to the episode.
Nuclear weapons serve only one purpose. It's an important purpose, but it's a single purpose. And that's to prevent the use of nuclear weapons against us or our friends.
The U.S. maintains 3 ways it can launch a nuclear weapon. These bombers, land-based missiles, and submarine-based missiles. So if an enemy destroys 2, the U.S. will always have a 3rd to strike back with. But having nuclear-capable bombers is particularly important to the U.S.
So the bomber leg of the triad, one of its main advantages is signaling. You can get your bombers airborne, and that sends a signal to an adversary that you're serious. If things change and you decide, hey, call off the attack, the bombers can turn around and come back. Missiles, once you fire them, there's no bringing them back.
So theoretically, U.S. deterrence depends on having bombers that can evade the best air defenses, and enough of them to survive a major attack. The problem is, the U.S. only has 19 Spirits left.
We really took a peace dividend in the 1990s because we didn't have another major strategic rival. We only bought 21 of them in total. One of them crashed, and one of them is set aside just for testing purposes. You really only have 19 possible aircraft.
In fact, the U.S. has reduced its bomber fleet by 2/3 since 1990, and the planes that it still has are in pretty rough shape. The 19 Spirits and 62 Lancers are getting old and have become expensive to maintain. So the U.S. believes it needs a bomber to replace them that is more advanced and easier to operate. Their solution is the B-21 Raider. Despite limited information about it, the Raider is clearly inspired by the Spirit's design, with some improvements. Its tail shape will likely help it fly more efficiently at high altitudes than the Spirit's sawtooth-shaped tail, and its engine intake valves are lower, giving it a sleeker profile which will help it deflect radar better. The U.S. claims that on advanced radars, the Raider appears smaller than an insect. Plus, the defense company building the Raider claims that it will one day be able to be flown remotely, like a drone.
Will any other country in the world have a plane comparable to the B-21?
Not even close, because this gives us a set of capabilities that really you can't find anywhere else.
The U.S. is keeping the Stratofortress to use against undefended targets, but by replacing the Lancers and the Spirits with Raiders, the U.S. is hoping to maintain the ability to bomb anything in the world, even as one country builds even better defenses.
China may be one step closer to attacking Taiwan.
China's Air Force is now the largest in Asia and the world's 3rd largest.
Since the 1990s, China has poured hundreds of billions of dollars into improving its military. It's threatening to one day use it to invade Taiwan. But since the U.S. has promised to defend Taiwan, China's built some of the world's best air defenses.
So it's very difficult if you actually want to fly in or near China.
If a war broke out, China could use thousands of ballistic missiles to destroy U.S. bases in the region, forcing the U.S. to rely heavily on its bombers, which can take off from the mainland. But China could then use its very advanced radar to detect and then help destroy any non-stealthy bombers, leaving the U.S. with only its Spirits to take them out. Since many of these defenses are mounted on vehicles, the Spirits would need to fly around for hours searching for them, a task that might be hard to accomplish with only 19 planes. B-21 Raider is nicknamed the China Bomb because the U.S. designed it with this exact scenario in mind. Its longer range and advanced stealth is reportedly suited to evade and destroy China's best defenses, and in order to have enough of them, the U.S. plans to purchase 100 of them to start, meaning at $700 million each, this plane will cost the U.S. at least $203 billion over the next 30 years.
That part of the Air Force is actually becoming more important, more critical than the fighters or the other types. If you've got to prioritize, I think you put the bomber right up there.
By building a plane that China can't detect, the U.S. is hoping to deter it from even starting a war.
America's defense will always be rooted in deterring conflict. So we are again making it plain to any potential foe. The risk and the cost of aggression far out.
Nếu mà dùng wifi mất mạng hoài luôn đấy.
Play any conceivable games.
But today, the Raider is still only in the testing phase. So how sure are we that it's going to work?
So there are absolutely risks that the B-21 will fall short. The first is that the program just
Có ồn không ta? Hình như hơi ồn thì phải. Ồn thì phải. Ồn thì phải.
So there are absolutely risks that the B-21
Tiếng
will fall
quạt thôi.
short. The first is that the program just
Tiếng quạt, thôi chịu đi. Tiếp tục nèo.
goes terribly awry.
Rob Farley is an expert in military doctrine.
It's just really so there are absolutely risks that the B-21 will fall short. The first is that the program just goes terribly awry.
Rob Farley is an expert in military doctrine.
It's just really, really hard to design and build a large number of incredibly sophisticated pieces of military equipment. Most of these projects, you actually have to invent a ton of stuff. And then you hope that that process goes smoothly, and sometimes it doesn't go smoothly.
Like what happened to the Spirit. Once built, the special coating invented to absorb radar turned out not to work in heavy rain. Fixing it required hours of extra maintenance, causing the cost of each Spirit to rise out of control, a phenomenon ominously called the death spiral.
And the death spiral is when Congress looks at this number, says, oh my goodness, these planes are $2 billion a piece, how can we possibly afford them? And says, well, let's try not to buy 100 of them, let's try to buy 50 of them. When you only buy 50 of them, you are including all of the infrastructure cost. Your cost per plane then skyrockets, right? Yeah. Because you're getting fewer planes, but you're spending almost as much money.
That's how back in the 90s, the US went from ordering 132 Spirits to receiving just 21 for two.
Lấy nước phát.
$2 billion each. More recently, a new stealth fighter jet, the F-35, flirted with the death spiral after many technical problems led to years of delays and billions in cost overruns. So far, reports claim that the B-21 program is on schedule and roughly on budget. But even if the US does everything right, the B-21 could still fall short if its enemies develop even better radar that can detect it.
Now, in the past, there have been scenarios where we have bought brand new weapons, the B-58 Hustler, just in the strategic bomber family, which were almost completely rendered obsolete within 3, 4, 5 years of their development, right, by new technology.
In that case, the Raider's internal electronics that help it evade sensors are reportedly being designed to allow constant upgrades. So it will be able to keep up and remain stealthy for decades. Despite these risks, the US is moving forward and spending billions on what it believes is the plane it needs for the future.
Honestly, I think we don't have a choice. If you want to be a world power and you want to be able to deter countries like Russia and China, I think we have to have this capability. I would negotiate a hard bargain with the contractor, but at the end of the day, I think we need it.
All right, thanks for watching episode 12. You might have noticed that was our second kind of geopolitical story in a row, and it's because we've got 4 sports stories coming up for you next. The first one is about the Euros soccer tournament coming up this month. This was actually one of the stories that I pitched Johnny and Iz when we were coming up with Search Party, so I'm really excited about that one. But we'll also have stories about Brazil. If you're a fan from Brazil, keep an eye on our community tab because I might need your help for a story coming up later in June. And then we're going to cover the Olympics as well. As usual, there's information about our membership program that's in the description below. And please keep sending me stories. It's been really helpful. I really love doing stories that you guys recommend. Thank you all for your help, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thực ra nói về làm clip kiểu như này ấy, mình đã muốn làm vài năm rồi, 2-3 năm trước, ít nhất là 2-3 năm trước, bởi vì sau một thời gian mình xem Johnny Harris thì mình thấy là cái kiểu content như này, kiểu nội dung như này nó rất là còn nhiều đất ở Việt Nam, nhưng mà quay đi quay lại chỉ là mình lười, mình không thực sự chú tâm vào để mình đầu tư. Chứ còn nói về ý tưởng ấy, nhiều lắm, nhiều vô cùng luôn. Cả từ những ý tưởng rất là đơn giản thôi, nhưng mà quan trọng hơn là cái cách mà mình diễn tả cũng như là cái cách mà mình đào sâu vào nó ấy. Nhưng từ cái clip này mình có 2 ý tưởng. Một là phân tích về cái xe đắt nhất thế giới, Thứ hai là cái phân tích về cái máy bay đắt nhất thế giới nó sẽ như nào. Nếu mình đào, mình nhận thấy là thực ra cái phần ý tưởng này nó luôn là một cái gì đấy nó nhẹ nhàng thôi, nó không quá là phải hoành tráng. Nhưng mà cái quan trọng hơn ấy, là cái cách mình quan trọng nhất ấy, thì mà quan trọng hơn nữa hay cái cách mà mình đi sâu, mình giải quyết vấn đề, mình đào sâu đến cỡ như nào. Trước khi mà chuyển sang clip tiếp theo thì mình muốn tìm hiểu xem một cái vừa nãy trong clip ấy mình có thấy ông đây có đeo một cái tai nghe có cái phone, cái mic nói. Nó ạ. Thì cái tai nghe này mình thấy rất là nhiều lần rồi, và mình thấy ở trong những cái giải e-sport. Mình tò mò là tại sao họ lại dùng, bởi vì là thực ra về bản chất là chất lượng nó vẫn không thể bằng được những cái mic rời. Nhưng mà có thể mình không biết cái này là brand gì, là model gì, mình thử xem nào. Mic bed mic for e-sport bình luận viên là gì nhỉ? Bình luận viên là gì nhỉ? Bình commentator support announce microphone recommendation headward microphone. Ủa, không phải cái này, không phải đó. Sennheiser gì đây? $11 triệu phải không ta? Hơi giống vì mình nhớ là có cái mic này trông khá đặc biệt. 11 triệu thì cũng là cao đấy, không phải đùa đâu. Cái này đúng rồi, mình thấy chất lượng của cái SM7B này là đỉnh nhất rồi. Nhưng mà rất là hay thấy những cái trận gọi là thể thao điện tử ấy, họ dùng cái mic mà đeo headphone đeo vào tai, cũng như là có cái mic luôn. Rồi, tạm thế đi. Tiếp theo là clip của Johnny Harris. Johnny đọc nhau Johnny à? Johnny yep, Johnny. This is from in the Middle East. Không hiểu cái tiêu đề lắm.
Along the banks of the most important waterway on Earth sits the country of Yemen, a place that was two countries for decades until the year 1990 when it was unified into one, a fragile patchwork of groups, all with different tribal backgrounds, religious beliefs, and political aspirations. The story I want to tell starts in the 90s.
Mình muốn chỉnh cái này audio này xem có chỉnh được không, nó cắt bớt cái tiếng gió đi như nào ta. Mic này, filter này, mình đang để rồi đấy, để filter rồi đấy. Để như nó cắt hết tiếng gió luôn này. Nhưng mà liệu nó có chất lượng hơn không? Trong trường hợp mà mình để như này và trong trường hợp mình vừa nói vừa
When one group forms up in the northern mountains of
tiếng
Yemen,
này.
it started by a group of religious Yemenis
xem
who
nhá.
call themselves
Escape này. Live này. Escape này. Cắt hết tiếng gió luôn đây. Nhưng mà liệu nó có chất lượng hơn không? Trong trường hợp mà mình để như này và trong trường hợp mình vừa nói vừa
When one group forms up in the northern mountains of Yemen, it started by a group of religious Yemenis.
Ok đấy, thử nào. Cứ để ngay đi, để nguyên ngay đi. Rồi. Full screen. Giảm nhỏ đi một chút.
Until the year 1990, when it was unified into one, a fragile patchwork of groups, all with different tribal backgrounds, religious beliefs, and political aspirations. The story I want to tell starts in the 90s, when one group forms up in the northern mountains of Yemen. It started by a group of religious Yemenis who call themselves the Believing Youth, who were members of a Shiite Muslim sect called the Zaidi. Zaidi Muslims used to be the majority when the country was split in two, but in the new unified Yemen, they became a minority and felt neglected and discriminated against. At first, the group focuses on rebuilding the Zaidi
phức tạp thế. Riêng cái tên thấy phức tạp vãi chưởng rồi.
Religious identity, hosting summer camps for young men and offering religious education. But in the late 1990s, the group starts to change in important ways. A member of Yemen's parliament resigns in protest and joins the Believing Youth. He felt that the government of Yemen was corrupt and far too influenced by Yemen's neighbor to the north, Saudi Arabia. Al-Houthi blamed outside influence for many of the country's problems. So as he leaves the government, Al-Houthi uses his wealth and family connections in the Zaidi community to become the leader of the Believing Youth. He wants an Islamic revolution, modeled after the one in Iran, one that kicks out any foreign influence and restores Islamic values. With al-Houthi's influence, this group of young men in the mountainous region of Yemen starts to change. They begin protesting Yemen's president, Ali Abdullah Saleh. Soon they start taking up weapons, taking over territory, and eventually setting up their own security checkpoints in their region. The Believing Youth are starting to look a lot less like a summer camp and a lot more like a militia, like a rebellion. President Saleh, who had previously supported the Believing Youth, is starting to get worried. And then in 2001, the entire Middle East would change forever. After 9/11, the US launches a war on terror. They ask President Saleh for help, and he cooperates, taking military aid and allowing American special forces to operate inside Yemen, where the terrorist group Al-Qaeda has a presence. 18 months later, the US US launches a war. The entire Middle East would change forever. After 9/11, the US launches a war on terror. They ask President Saleh for help, and he cooperates, taking military aid and allowing American special forces to operate inside Yemen, where the terrorist group Al-Qaeda has a presence. 18 months later, the US presence in the region would balloon even more when the American military invades and occupies Iraq. For al-Houthi and his group of young men, this crosses a red line and deeply radicalizes the movement. Al-Houthi criticizes the president publicly for pandering to what he sees as American imperialism in Muslim lands. And many in Yemen agree, joining the movement and bolstering their numbers. Al-Houthi adopts the violent slogan that sits on the flag of his movement to this day: God is great, death to America, death to Israel, curse on the Jews, victory to Islam. President Saleh feels threatened by the growth of this increasingly radical movement that is taking control of territory in the north. He issues this increasing.
Mình vẫn không nhớ được mấy cái tên cái đạo này, đạo Hồi này là Jews là biết rồi, người Hồi giáo là Jewish, Islam là gì? Đâu, Jews là người gì nhỉ? Không phải đạo Hồi, nhầm. Jews là người
Death to Israel,
Do Thái, Do Thái.
Curse on the Jews, victory to
Islam là đạo hồi. Có đạo gì nữa?
Islam. President Saleh feels
Ả Rập là đạo hồi à?
threatened by the growth of this increasingly radical movement that is taking control of territory in the north. He issues an arrest warrant and a bounty for al-Houthi and brutally cracks down on their protests. In response, the believing youth launch an armed rebellion in the north of Yemen, leading to counterattacks by the Yemeni military. Shortly after the fighting begins, al-Houthi is killed in a cave in the north. The rebels he leaves behind fight on with new conviction, and the world would know them by the name of their martyr, a symbol of imperial resistance that would soon be firing rockets at Israel and hijacking cargo ships in the Red Sea.
Đây chính là cái vụ Houthi từ đâu ra đây, chính là từ đây. Cách đây khoảng mấy tuần hay là một tháng gì đấy thì Houthi này nó đánh bom rất là nhiều thuyền đi qua cái này mình không biết là gì, eo biển à, kênh đào. Trong đấy có một thuyền của Việt Nam, một người thuyền viên của Việt Nam bị chết. Chính là bọn này, chính cái đội này.
This Yemen story is about to get really fascinating. I'm going to pause for a second because I need to thank the sponsor of today's video.
Yep.
Sponsors are how we're able to do our journalism here on YouTube. So thank you Incogni for sponsoring our data market, where data brokers make a lot of money selling our information to corporations or insurance companies permission to act list. And it's not like there's like lists. They start the process of taking your information off. And you get to watch. And I'm really glad they've come to us. Very happy with support ad read. Helps. Thank you Incogni for sponsoring today's video. With that, let's dive back into Yemen. By 2004, the Houthis have morphed into a full-blown rebellion, fighting against Yemen's government from their northern strongholds. They know this land well, and they have local support, allowing them to fight a guerrilla campaign against the government forces, blending in with civilians, hiding in mountains and caves, and allowing them to resist the much better equipped Yemeni army. As the conflict turns more violent, more tribes in the region would feel that the military is being overly brutal, leading them to join the Houthis. And it's at this time that the conflict goes international. The Houthis say that Saudi Arabia is letting the government of Yemen position troops right across this border. So they invade into Saudi Arabia, killing Saudi soldiers and taking hostages. This pulls Saudi Arabia into the conflict as they respond with airstrikes and troops and push the Houthis out of their territory, punishing them for this invasion. Now over here, Iran is watching this war, and they see an opportunity. The Houthis are now fighting directly against their biggest rival, Saudi Arabia. So they start secretly sending weapons to the Houthis. At least that's what Saudi Arabia claims, saying that they intercepted an Iranian ship filled with weapons and military trainers on their way to the Houthis. It looks like Iran is directly supporting the Houthis now. Though how much support they provide...
Ví dụ như Iran là gì? Iran là đạo gì? Người Iran là đạo gì? Ở ChatGPT xem nào. Người Ả Rập. Người Ả Rập là đạo gì? Người Iran là đạo gì? Đạo hồi. Người Saudi cũng là đạo hồi này. Iran là gì? Đạo hồi à? Đạo hồi cũng đạo hồi này. Sao lại đánh nhau nhỉ?
Divide behind the scenes will always be intentionally unclear. As the conflict between the Houthis and the government continues in the north, Saudi Arabia has been fighting their own war on terror against a branch of al-Qaeda operating in Saudi Arabia. Seeing that their days are numbered, this branch of al-Qaeda flees south over the border into Yemen, where they merge their forces with the Yemen branch of al-Qaeda. They create al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, or AQAP, one of the most dangerous and well-funded versions of the group to ever exist. The group's goal is to create a strict Islamic state across the whole region, while violently waging holy war against foreigners in Muslim lands. This puts them at odds with both the Yemeni government and the Houthis. The conflict is getting more complicated. Around 2011, the region starts to change in big ways. In one country after another, there's an outpouring of public anger on the streets, demanding change from their government, removing old leaders. This is called the Arab Spring. It's upheaval that spirals the region into hope and chaos.
Mùa Ả Rập.
Iran and Saudi Arabia see this as an opportunity to strategically choose sides in all of these countries in hopes that when the dust settles, they will come out with a stronger hand of allies in the region. And one of their main focuses is Yemen, a country that is also rising up, calling for President Saleh to step down. The corrupt dictator of Yemen is running out of time, which is something the Houthis have been fighting for years. But Saleh refuses to step down, adding fuel to the uprising. Saudi Arabia sees this situation at their southern border and decides to step in with the help of the UN, convincing Saleh to transfer power to his vice president in exchange for immunity from prosecution. On his way out, Saleh takes the billions of dollars that he corruptly amassed during his time in office, and he also retains the loyalty of key parts of the military, fighters that are only loyal to him. But the people aren't satisfied with this new Saudi-backed president. The government remains weak and unorganized. Meanwhile, the Houthis are taking advantage of this infighting and only getting stronger, taking more and more territory from the government, adding to their forces and receiving more support from their backer Iran, who is supplying them with more training, missiles, drones, and other advanced weapons. They used these weapons in the fall of 2014 to march into southern Yemen, taking over large swaths of territory. Now that the Houthis have momentum, the former President Saleh joins them in an alliance of convenience. In fact, Saleh's forces are critical in helping the Houthis take the capital city of Sana'a. Saleh is now working with his former enemy against his own vice president, the man he had to give power to when he stepped down. President Hadi and his government flee south as the Houthis take over, but the Houthis are right behind them. So Hadi has to flee to Saudi Arabia, trying to govern Yemen from there. But the Houthis just keep gaining momentum. By the middle of 2015, they now control the capital city completely, where they create their own government and take control of the government's military weapons, helping them expand even further into the south. Now that the Houthis are in power, they run an oppressive regime that silences free speech, crushes dissent through arrest and torture, and recruits children as soldiers, all while imposing strict religious laws that undermine women's rights. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia is getting nervous. Their southern neighbor is now controlled by a group that is funded by their biggest enemy. So, they recruit the support of countries around the region and invade Yemen with the goal of removing the Houthis from power. The war is led by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi Arabia's up-and-coming leader and defense minister. He starts with a widespread bombing campaign and a naval blockade that prevents shipping in and out of the country, with the goal of trying to cut off support coming in from Iran. The Crown Prince turns to the United States in need of more weapons for this war. While the US leaders are reluctant to get involved in another Middle East conflict, they also want to maintain a good relationship with Saudi Arabia, who is their major security and energy partner in the region. They also have an interest in weakening al-Qaeda's growing presence in Yemen. So in addition to supporting this war with logistics and intelligence, President Obama approves billions of dollars of weapons, planes, tanks, and even weapons banned by most of the world for how dangerous they are for civilians.
Theo mình biết là Ả Rập rất là giàu, Ả Rập Saudi rất là giàu. Sao lại cần tiền của Mỹ à? Siêu giàu luôn đấy.
Like cluster munitions. This quickly turns Saudi Arabia into the largest importer of American weapons for the next 4 years. So it's 2015, and Yemen is in a full-blown war between the Houthis and Saudi Arabia and their coalition. This is when al-Qaeda, who's not on either side, takes advantage of this chaos and makes a land grab in the middle of Yemen. They take major cities and clash with government forces. Also taking advantage of the instability is the terrorist group ISIS, who come to Yemen and fight the Houthis and al-Qaeda at the same time, though their attacks are scattered and they don't control significant territory. The US then gets more involved by launching airstrikes at al-Qaeda and ISIS targets to stop them from gaining any more territory. They try to kill their leadership,
But the US has to do this carefully because they don't want to engage the Houthis. Their fight is with Al-Qaeda and ISIS. In May of 2015, the Houthis attack a city just across the border in Saudi Arabia, killing 2 and taking hostages, forcing an airport to shut down. The Crown Prince doesn't take being attacked on his own soil lightly, especially by Iran's proxies. So over the next 24 hours, the Saudis launch 130 airstrikes in Yemen, hitting homes, schools, and hospitals. Thousands are forced to flee from their home. Hundreds are reported dead, though we'll never know the real death toll. These strikes are almost immediately called war crimes, but the Crown Prince doesn't back down. His coalition then sends in ground troops from the south, pushing back the Houthis and taking back the city of Aden. He's behaving as if he's fighting his greatest enemy, Iran. It's a vicious cycle that is common in proxy wars like this, and it lands the people of Yemen in the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. The international community tries to intervene with diplomatic efforts to stop the fighting, but over the next 6 years, those efforts would fail, and Saudi Arabia would continue its brutal campaign, all using American weapons. The Houthis continue to fight to show that they are legitimate, that they are the government of Yemen. They aren't just doing Iran's bidding. The war continues to destroy cities and land, and the blockade continues to keep trade out. The Saudis continue to bomb indiscriminately, and with time, 2 million Yemenis are displaced, forced to leave their homes, to flee this violence.
150,000 civilians have had no.
But this doesn't stop the Houthis from escalating their offensive. They start attacking Saudi Arabia directly with missiles and drones in their capital city and their civilian airports, using weapons that most believe are coming from Iran. In December of 2017, the Saudis and the UAE convinced President Saleh to break his alliance with the Houthis and return to power as president of Yemen. They hope that Saleh, the former dictator, might be able to hold on to power and rule more effectively. Saleh takes the deal and changes sides yet again, breaking with the Houthis and joining the Saudi-led coalition. Fighting breaks out between the Houthis and Saleh's militias, and Saleh is killed just 2 days later. Meanwhile, in the United States, there's a new president. President Trump orders increased drone strikes and raids against Al-Qaeda, helping government forces take back large amounts of territory. Despite the war crimes committed using American weapons, Trump approves more weapons sales to Saudi Arabia to wage this war. And then in 2018, the conflict takes on a new dimension. The UAE, who's a part of this Saudi-led coalition, is starting to lose faith in the direction this war is going. They don't like the current government of Yemen, and they're losing soldiers on the ground. It's damaging their reputation on the world stage. So the UAE leaves the coalition, but they still want to influence who will ultimately control Yemen. So they start backing a new group in the south called the Southern Transitional Council, or STC. This group isn't aligned with the government or the Houthis. They're calling for a separation of the southern part of Yemen. They want their own state. They want their own country. So the UAE starts to withdraw their troops from the south of the country, and the STC separatists start taking control of southern provinces. The Saudi coalition is fracturing, and yet another group is jumping into the fighting, showing just how up for grabs Yemen has become. By the fall of 2019, the war has reached maximum complexity. You've got the Saudi coalition backing the former government of Yemen, mostly relegated to the east of the country. The UAE is now backing this separatist movement in the south, who are fighting against the former government of Yemen. The Houthis, backed by Iran, still maintain majority control of the major cities in the north. Al-Qaeda and its militia allies are still fighting to control small slices of the country, and the US continues to conduct airstrikes against Al-Qaeda and ISIS, while supporting and selling more weapons to the Saudi coalition. Yemen is fracturing further, and if there's any hope for peace, power needs to be consolidated. So Saudi Arabia and the UAE make amends. And then, together, they convince the government of Yemen and the separatists in the south to form a new coalition to fight against the Houthis together as a united front. But it doesn't stop the Houthis, who are getting really good at fighting and are firing more Iranian missiles and drones into Saudi Arabia, hitting state-owned oil refineries and threatening to drive up oil prices globally. By January 2021, the Houthis,
a group started to provide religious summer camps to young men, are now battle-hardened, and they control 70 to 80% of the population of Yemen. Later that year, the UN announces that approximately 20 million of those people are dependent on humanitarian aid for their daily needs. And at this point, the war starts to settle in to an uncomfortable stalemate. In April 2022, the UN brokers a ceasefire, and the fighting stops. Behind the scenes, Saudi Arabia and Iran have been in diplomatic talks, sponsored by China. Regional tensions are cooling, which means that their proxy war in Yemen is also cooling. Saudi Arabia has had enough of the fighting. President Hadi resigns and hands power over to a council meant to govern Yemen and manage the war, and both sides are tired of the fighting. So when that ceasefire is set to expire in October 2022, the conflict mostly stays quiet, even without a new agreement. By 2023, Saudi Arabia and Iran have officially restored their diplomatic relations. Saudi Arabia hoping that this means Iran will stop supporting Houthis to attack their southern border. But the Saudis keep their maritime blockade around the country, making life in Yemen unlivable for millions. But at this point, the heaviest of the fighting on all sides has stopped. But then, in the fall of 2023, the Houthis were back in the news. After the Palestinian group Hamas launches a brutal attack into Israel, the Israeli military invades the Gaza Strip, vowing to destroy Hamas and free the hostages that they took. The campaign leads to tens of thousands of Palestinian civilian deaths, and it provokes a response from Iranian-backed groups all throughout the region. The Houthis are one of those groups. They launch drones and cruise missiles into southern Israel, vowing that their attacks won't stop until the invasion of Gaza stops. And then they start firing their missiles and drones at cargo ships that are traveling through the Red Sea, where 25% of container traffic travels, a major artery in our global economy. In the days after these missiles start flying, traffic through this Red Sea route declines by 73%. In response, the US and UK shoot down Houthi missiles and drop bombs on Houthi military targets in Yemen, pulling the US and its allies deeper into this enduring conflict.
Oh, yeah.
The reason I wanted to tell you the story of this conflict in Yemen, because it represents the vicious cycle present in a lot of proxy wars, where geopolitical rivals use their neighbors as battlefields instead of fighting each other directly.
Yep.
They fund and add fuel to local conflicts, escalating them to the entire country and often to the entire region, leaving violence and power vacuums in their wake, which are then filled by bad actors, trying to take advantage of the instability. All of this changes borders, destroys cities, and ruins lives. It's the story of powerful countries and their cynical scramble for influence and power in vulnerable places, leaving behind them a wake of tremendous human suffering.
Nhiều thông tin một cách vãi chưởng luôn đi. Không ngờ là ở Yemen lại có Yemen lại có cả Al-Qaeda. Ok đó. Và Houthi là xuất phát từ đâu? Tại sao nó lại đánh phá tàu chở hàng? Thì đây, clip này mình chỉ nắm thêm được một chút như vậy rồi. Mật mã. Quay trở lại chưa? Rồi. Bây giờ là đúng tròn được 1 tiếng. Thì do cái mạng này nó có vấn đề quá nên là mình hôm nay live đây thôi. Nhưng trước khi live ấy, thì như này, đó là cách đây khoảng 4-5 năm, mình không nhớ chính xác nhưng mà ít nhất là phải 5-6 năm rồi, mình luôn muốn là được 70 cân. Và cách đây tầm 4 tháng nên là đầu tiên mình chạm mốc 70 cân khi mà mình về quê ăn Tết hồi đầu tháng 1, đầu tháng 2 ấy. Và lý do là bởi vì là mình ăn uống đầy đủ hơn là thứ nhất, nhưng mà quan trọng hơn ấy, là mình giảm cái cường độ chạy. Và thậm chí là sau khi mà hồi tháng 3 mình quay trở lại Sài Gòn ấy, thì mình còn giảm cường độ chạy nhiều hơn nữa, gần như là bỏ hoàn toàn luôn. 2 tháng chạy có 50 cây à. Trong khi đó hồi trước là mình 50 cây chắc mình chạy mất được 4 buổi, hơn một tuần. Thì vấn đề nó nằm ở chỗ đó là mình thấy mình nặng hơn. Đến hôm qua khi mà tình cờ có một bạn ấy lâu không lên công ty thì bạn ấy gặp mình, bạn ấy nói là anh Tú giờ này tập gym mà nhìn nó đô nó khác. Thì mình nghĩ đơn giản thôi, bởi vì là lâu bạn ấy không gặp mình, chứ còn cái việc mà mình tập gym này nó diễn ra cách đấy 7-8 năm rồi, 7-8 năm nay rồi. Nhưng mà đến tối qua thì mình đi ăn về, hôm qua mình ăn hơi no, thì mình cảm giác bụng mình hơi to. Và đến hôm nay ấy, cái đấy mình bỏ qua thôi, nhưng mà đến hôm nay ấy, thì mình mặc quần, mình cứ thấy chật, mình ngồi làm mình cứ thấy chật, mình cứ tháo thắt lưng. Nhưng mà đến lúc đến lần thứ 2, lần thứ 3 rồi mình mới nhận ra là thắt lưng của mình đang rất là mỏng, rất là lỏng. Và cái việc mà mình đang thấy chật ấy là do cái quần của mình và bụng to. 2 tháng nay thì mình không cân, nhưng mà mình nghĩ là chắc mình phải lên khoảng 2 cân rồi, 72 cân, là một kỷ lục luôn đấy. Và thực sự là mình thấy bị báo động, do là mình không chạy là một, nhưng mà mình cũng lười đi tập nữa, mình bỏ, không phải lười tập mà mình bỏ tập khá là nhiều. Cho nên là chắc trong vòng mình đang đang mong muốn trong vòng 1 tháng tới này mình sẽ hardcore rất là nhiều. Không sao cả, bởi vì mình đã từng từ 68 cân xuống 62 cân năm kia, năm 2022 khi mà mình ở Nha Trang mà mình bị ốm thì mình còn 62 cân. Cùng khoảng 2-3 tháng thì mình lên lại được 68 cân, 66, 67 cân. Thì không có lý gì là mình không thể quay lại được cái mốc 69-70 cân cả nha. Đây, hôm nay là ngày 22 tháng 5. Đây là bụng mình. Rồi, hẹn khoảng 1 tháng nữa xem là nó khác biệt như nào nha. Bye bye, hẹn gặp lại buổi live lần sau. Bye.